Hi, I'm Maya. I thought being the successful daughter meant earning respect, love, maybe even a decent bed during our annual family reunion. Instead, I found myself sleeping on a moldy cot in my parents' garage while my unemployed brother got the master guest room and my sister's family took over the other bedrooms. The concrete floor was so cold it seeped through 3 blankets, and the smell of motor oil mixed with mildew made it hard to breathe. But that wasn't even the worst part. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The worst part was discovering that I had been secretly paying my parents' mortgage for 3 years, covering my brother's car payments, and funding my sister's kids' daycare while they all treated me like the family disappointment who couldn't even land a real relationship. When I finally had enough and stood up for myself, they called me ungrateful, selfish, and dramatic. So I did something that changed everything. I walked into Millbrook's First National Bank on Monday morning and had a very interesting conversation with their loan officer about exactly who had been making those mortgage payments all along. The invitation came in May, just like it did every year, written in my mother Linda's careful handwriting on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than it should have. Chen Family Reunion, 2024, July 12th, 14th weekend, hosted by Bob. And Linda, everyone welcome. The exclamation point felt aggressive somehow, like enthusiasm forced through a pen tip. I stared at it from my kitchen table in my Park Slope apartment, morning coffee growing cold in my hands while Brooklyn traffic hummed 6 stories below. Alex, my roommate, glanced over from where she was burning toast again, her scrubs already, wrinkled from her overnight shift at the hospital. "The annual torture festival?" she asked, nodding toward the invitation. I laughed, but it felt hollow. My mom would die if she heard you call it that. Your mom would die if she knew half. "The things I call your family," Alex said, scraping black crumbs into the sink. "You going?" That was the question, wasn't it? For the past 5 years since I'd graduated college and landed my job at a fintech startup in Manhattan, the family reunion had become this weird performance where everyone pretended I was doing amazing while simultaneously treating me like I was still the baby sister who needed protection from the world. I made more money than any of them had ever seen, lived in one of the most expensive cities in the country, and had successfully navigated a career in tech as an Asian woman under 30. But somehow, in Millbrook, I was still just little Maya, who needed to be taken care of. "Yeah," I said finally, "I'll go." Alex gave me that look, the one that said she could see right through my people-pleasing bullshit. "You know you don't have to, right? You're allowed to have other plans." I did know that, intellectually. But there was something about family, obligation that ran deeper than logic, especially in the Chen household. We were second-generation Chinese American, and even though my parents had been born in New York, there were certain traditions that felt carved in stone. Family came first, always. Success was measured not just by what you achieved, but by how much you could give back to the people who had supported you. And according to my parents, I owed them everything. The thing was, I had been giving back, more than they knew. 2 weeks later, I was driving my Honda Civic up Route 9, watching familiar landscapes roll past the windows. The Hudson Valley in summer was beautiful in that postcard way that made city people want to buy houses they couldn't afford and pretend they were country folk. I'd made this drive probably 50 times in my life, first as a kid strapped into car seats, then as a teenager counting down the minutes until I could go back to school, and now as an adult who should have learned to say no by now. My phone rang through the car speakers, interrupting a true crime podcast I'd been binge listening to during the drive. Marcus, my older brother, his contact photo showing him in one of those professional headshots actors get that make them look like they're trying to sell you insurance. "Maya, you almost here? Mom's been asking about you every 5 minutes." "About an hour out," I said, checking the GPS. Traffic wasn't bad. Good, good. Hey, so heads up, Jenny's kids are here already and they're kind of running wild. Mom's a little stressed. Jenny was our older sister, 35, and married to David, who sold insurance and had the personality of wet cardboard. Their kids, Emma and Jake, were 8 and 6 respectively, and had the kind of energy that could power a small town. "Where's everyone sleeping?" I asked, though I already suspected I knew the answer. "Oh, so Jenny and David got the blue guest room since they have the kids, and I'm in the yellow room since I got here first. You'll probably be on the couch in the basement, but honestly, it's pretty comfortable down there." The basement. Not even the living room couch, but the basement, where the ceiling was too low and it smelled like the dehumidifier had been fighting a losing battle against decades of moisture. I felt that familiar knot form in my stomach, the one that always appeared when I started to realize how little my comfort mattered to my family. "Sure," I said. "That's fine." "Great. Oh, and Maya, don't mention anything about the audition thing to Mom, okay? She's still weird about the acting stuff." Marcus had been trying to make it as an actor for 10 years now, ever since he'd graduated college with a theater degree, and decided that waiting tables while going to casting calls was a viable career plan. He was 32 and still living, with our parents, still chasing a dream that seemed to get further away every year. But somehow, I was the one who needed to avoid stressing Mom out. "Got it," I said. I hung up and turned the podcast back on, but I couldn't focus on the story anymore. Instead, I found myself thinking about the automatic transfer I'd set up 3 years ago, the one that moved $1,500 from my checking account to my parents' account every month. They thought it was their mortgage payment coming from Dad's retirement fund, because that's what I'd told them when I'd quietly taken over the payments after Dad's hours got cut at the garage where he'd worked for 20 years. They'd been worried about losing the house where all of our childhood memories lived, where Grandma Rose still visited every Sunday for dinner. So I'd stepped in, the way a good daughter should. I'd called the bank, worked out the details, and made sure the payments came from an account they had access to so they wouldn't feel embarrassed. It was supposed to be temporary, just until Dad found something else or until they figured out their finances. That was 3 years ago. The house looked exactly the same as I pulled into the driveway, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters, and a wraparound porch that Dad had built himself the year I started high school. The lawn was perfectly mowed, the flower beds my mother obsessed over were bursting with summer blooms, and there were already 3 other cars parked in the driveway. Uncle Tommy's beat-up pickup truck, Jenny's minivan with soccer ball stickers covering the back window, and a rental car that probably belonged to Aunt Patty and Uncle Tommy, who always flew in from their restaurant in Albany. I sat in my car for a moment, air conditioning still running, and took a deep breath. Through the large front window, I could see movement inside, people gathered in the living room, probably already deep into the kind of conversations that would be repeated word for word for the next 3 days. Who was dating whom? Whose kids were doing well in school? Whose business was struggling? Whose marriage was on the rocks? My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Survival mode activated. Remember you have an out if you need it." I smiled for the first time since I'd gotten Marcus's call. Alex had been my roommate for 2 years, and she'd heard enough of my family stories to know exactly what I was walking into. She'd also offered to call me with a fake emergency if I needed an excuse to leave early, though we both knew I probably wouldn't take her up on it. The front door opened before I'd even made it halfway up the walkway, and Mom came rushing out with that particular brand of controlled chaos that defined every family gathering. Linda Chen, at 55, was still beautiful in the way that Asian women often seem to age gracefully, but there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago, and her hands moved constantly when she talked, like she was trying to hold too many things at once. "Maya! Oh, honey, you look so skinny. Are you eating enough? The city is so expensive. I worry about you spending money on groceries when you should be saving." I let myself be pulled into one of her fierce hugs, breathing in the familiar combination of her gardenia perfume and the faint smell of whatever she'd been cooking all day. "I'm eating fine, Mom. I promise." "Good, good." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Come in. Everyone's here already. Grandma Rose is asking about you, and Uncle Tommy brought pictures from the restaurant renovations." The house was exactly as chaotic as I'd expected. Kids running through the hallway, adults clustered in various rooms, the sound of multiple conversations happening at once. The air conditioning was working overtime, but with this many people in the house, it was still warm and close. Jenny appeared from the kitchen, looking harried and beautiful at the same time, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked intentional. She'd always been the pretty one, the one who'd figured out how to be married and domestic while still seeming put together. "Maya, thank God you're here. Mom's been driving us crazy asking when you were going to arrive." "Traffic wasn't too bad," I said, setting down my overnight bag by the stairs. "Where should I put this?" "Oh." Jenny's expression shifted slightly, and I caught a quick glance between her and Mom. "So the thing is, with the kids and everything, the guest rooms are kind of full. Mom thought maybe you could stay in the garage. We set up a cot out there. And honestly, it's kind of like camping." The garage. Not the basement, which would have been bad enough, but the actual garage where Dad kept his tools and Mom stored Christmas decorations and boxes of things we'd probably never need again. "The garage," I repeated. "It's really not that bad." Mom jumped in quickly. "We moved the cars out, and there's that old air mattress from when you kids used to have sleepovers. It'll be fun, like when you were little." I looked around at the house that I was helping to pay for, at the family members who had claimed the comfortable bedrooms while I was relegated to sleeping between paint cans and lawn equipment. The rational part of my brain knew I should say something, should point out that maybe the person who lived farthest away deserved something better than a concrete floor. But the bigger part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to be grateful for whatever I was given, just nodded. "Sure," I said. "That sounds fine." "Great." Mom's relief was palpable. "Come say hi to everyone, and then we'll get you settled." The next hour was a blur of family greetings, the same conversations I'd had at every reunion for the past decade. Grandma Rose, who at 82 was still sharp as a tack and had opinions about everything, wanted to know why I wasn't married yet and whether I was saving enough money. Uncle Tommy talked about the restaurant business and how hard it was to find good help these days. Aunt Patty asked about my job in that way that made it clear she didn't really understand what I did, but was trying to be polite. Marcus held court in the living room, telling stories about his latest auditions and the pilot he was sure he was going to book any day now. Jenny's kids climbed all over everyone, demanding attention and snacks and constantly asking when they could go swimming in the community pool. It was familiar and exhausting, and exactly what I'd expected. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, where Mom was prepping for the big dinner tomorrow night. The kitchen had always been the heart of our house, a large space with a center island where we'd done homework and had late-night conversations and solved the problems of the world. It was also where I'd always felt most useful, helping with cooking and cleaning while my siblings found excuses to be elsewhere. "Need help with anything?" I asked, watching her chop vegetables with the precision of someone who'd been feeding large groups for decades. "Oh, you don't have to do anything, honey. You work so hard during the week." But her hands were moving faster than usual, and I could see the stress in the set of her shoulders. I started washing the dishes that had accumulated in the sink, falling into the rhythm we'd established over years of cooking together. "How's everything going?" I asked casually. "With Dad's retirement and everything?" "Oh, fine. You know how it is, adjusting to living on a fixed income, but we're managing. Your father's been talking about maybe getting a part-time job just to keep busy." I nodded. not mentioning that I knew exactly how their finances were going because I'd been supplementing them for years. Not just the mortgage, but other things too. Marcus's car payment when he was between jobs, which happened more often than anyone wanted to admit. The deposit for Jenny's kids' summer camp when money was tight. The new refrigerator when their old one died last spring. It had started small, a few $100s here and there when they needed help. But somehow it had grown into something bigger, a steady stream of financial support that no one talked about, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that the family wasn't as stable as everyone pretended. "Maya, honey, would you mind running to the store?" Mom asked, interrupting my thoughts. "I forgot to get ice cream for tomorrow, and you know how the kids love dessert." "Of course," I said, drying my hands on the dish towel. "Take Marcus with you," she added. "He knows where everything is." I found Marcus in the living room, scrolling through his phone while Jenny's kids played some elaborate game that involved a lot of running and shouting. He looked up when I approached, and for a second I saw something in his expression that might have been guilt. "Mom wants us to go get ice cream," I said. Sure. Let me just finish this text." We drove to the local grocery store in my car, the same place I'd been going since I was a kid, where Mrs. Patterson still worked the checkout and remembered everyone's names. Marcus was unusually quiet during the drive, staring out the window at the familiar streets. "You okay?" I asked as we pulled into the parking lot. "Yeah, just thinking." He paused, then looked over at me. "Maya, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you do it? The whole adult thing, I mean. You've got your life so figured out." I almost laughed, but something in his tone stopped me. "I don't have anything figured out, Marcus. I'm just taking it one day at a time like everyone else. But you've got the job, the apartment, the whole independence thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm still waiting for my real life to start, you know." We walked through the automatic doors into the blessed air conditioning of the grocery store, and I found myself really looking at my brother for maybe the first time in years. He was 32, handsome in that way that made casting directors call him back for second auditions, but never quite book the job. But there was something tired around his eyes, something that suggested he was starting to realize that dreams don't always come true just because you want them badly enough. "Marcus," I said carefully, "what's going on? Really?" "It's nothing dramatic," he said, grabbing a shopping cart. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I should have made different choices, more practical choices." We made our way to the frozen foods section, and I watched him load different flavors of ice cream into the cart, with the kind of focus that suggested he was avoiding eye contact. "You know I've been helping Mom and Dad with some bills, right?" I said quietly. His hand stilled on a carton of vanilla. "What kind of bills?" "The mortgage, for about 3 years now." He turned to look at me then, and I saw surprise and something else cross his features. "Maya, I had no idea." "I didn't want to make a big deal about it. They were worried about losing the house, and I was in a position to help." He shook his head. "That's a lot of money." "It's fine," I said automatically. I mean, it's what family does, right?" But even as I said it, I realized how strange it sounded. Was this what family did? Was I supposed to be quietly funding everyone else's life while sleeping in a garage during the one weekend a year we were all together? We finished shopping in relative silence, the weight of the conversation settling between us. On the drive back, Marcus cleared his throat. "Maya, for what it's worth, I think you should get a real bedroom this weekend. The garage thing is bullshit." I glanced over at him, surprised by the sudden honesty. "It's fine. It's just 2 nights." "No, it's not fine. You're doing more for this family than any of us, and we're treating you like an afterthought." "Marcus, I'm serious. I'm going to talk to Mom." But we both knew he wouldn't, just like we both knew I wouldn't push the issue, because that's how our family worked. Everyone knew the right thing to do, but no one wanted to be the one to disrupt the careful balance we'd all agreed to maintain. When we got back to the house, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the front lawn. Through the windows, I could see my family gathered in the living room, probably arguing about what movie to watch or whose turn it was to choose the music. It looked warm and comfortable, and exactly like the kind of scene that should make you grateful to be home. Instead, I found myself thinking about my apartment in Brooklyn, about the quiet evenings I spent reading on my fire escape, about the life I'd built that was entirely my own. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I just got back in my car and drove home. If I stopped pretending that being the reliable daughter was the same thing as being a valued family member. But I didn't get back in the car. Instead, I carried the ice cream inside, helped Mom put together a late dinner, and made conversation with relatives who seemed genuinely happy to see me. And later, when everyone was settled in their comfortable beds, I made my way out to the garage with a pillow and a thin blanket, trying not to think about how the concrete floor felt like sleeping on a tombstone. Tomorrow was the big reunion day when the rest of the extended family would arrive, and we'd all pretend to be the perfect Chen family success story. Uncle Tommy would brag about his restaurant, Aunt Patty would show off pictures of their latest vacation, and everyone would ask me about my job in the city while secretly thinking I was too career-focused to understand what really mattered in life. But as I lay there listening to the sounds of my family settling in for the night, comfortable and warm in their real beds, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Maybe it was the conversation with Marcus, or maybe it was the simple unfairness of sleeping next to a lawnmower while my unemployed brother enjoyed Egyptian cotton sheets. But for the first time in my adult life, I found myself wondering what would happen if I stopped being so grateful for so little. The air in the garage was thick and stale, and no matter how I positioned myself on the narrow cot, I couldn't get comfortable. Every time I was about to drift off, a car would drive by outside, or the house would settle with a creak that sounded amplified in the concrete space. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and pulled out my phone, scrolling through social media and trying not to think about how this was supposed to be a celebration of family togetherness. That's when I saw it. A Facebook post from Jenny, uploaded just an hour ago. A photo of the family gathered in the living room, everyone smiling and relaxed, with the caption, "So grateful for family time. Nothing like coming home. Blessed to Barm family first." I wasn't in the picture. None of the comments asked where I was. It was like I wasn't even there, despite being literally 20 feet away, breathing in the fumes from Dad's vintage motorcycle, and trying to sleep on a surface designed for storing lawn equipment. I stared at that photo for a long time, at the faces of people I loved who seemed to have completely forgotten I existed the moment I wasn't useful to them. And for the first time since I'd started helping them financially, I let myself wonder if maybe I was being taken advantage of. Maybe it was time to find out exactly how much my family valued me when I wasn't picking up their bills. I woke up before dawn with a crick in my neck and the taste of motor oil in my mouth. The garage had gotten cold during the night, that bone-deep chill that concrete holds even in summer, and I'd spent most of the dark hours shivering despite the humid July air outside. Through the small window above Dad's workbench, I could see the first hints of sunrise creeping across the sky, painting everything in shades of gray that matched how I felt. The house was quiet, that particular stillness that comes before a big family day when everyone is still gathering energy for the performance ahead. In a few hours, the rest of the extended family would arrive for the main reunion event at the community center, and we'd all put on our happy faces and pretend that the Chen family was thriving. I grabbed my phone to check the time and saw 3 missed calls from work. My stomach dropped as I remembered the client presentation that was supposed to happen Monday morning, the one I'd been preparing for weeks. I'd promised to review the final numbers over the weekend, but between the drive up and the family chaos, I'd completely forgotten. Quietly, I slipped out of the garage and into the main house, hoping to find a quiet corner where I could handle the work crisis without waking anyone. The kitchen was empty, morning light filtering through Mom's lace curtains and illuminating the coffee maker that someone had thankfully set up the night before. I poured myself a cup and settled at the kitchen island with my laptop, trying to focus on quarterly projections while my back ached from the torture device that had passed for a bed. My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker, Emma. Client. Moved the meeting to 8 a.m. Monday. Need those revenue models ASAP. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was exactly the kind of thing that happened when I tried to balance family obligations with my actual life. My job required constant attention, the kind of focus that didn't mesh well with sleeping in garages and pretending everything was fine. As I worked, I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Mom appeared in her bathrobe, looking surprisingly alert for someone who should have been exhausted from yesterday's preparations. "You're up early, honey," she said, moving toward the coffee maker. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied, not looking up from my laptop screen. "Just needed to handle some work stuff." "On a Saturday? They work you too hard in that city." I wanted to point out that this was exactly why I needed a decent night's sleep. Why maybe the successful daughter deserved better than a concrete floor. Instead, I just nodded and kept typing. "Maya, I hope you're not upset about the sleeping arrangements," Mom continued, settling across from me with her coffee. "It's just with Jenny's kids and Marcus needing space for his audition materials." Marcus brought audition materials to a family reunion? "Well, he has a big callback on Tuesday and he needs to practice, you understand." I stared at her, trying to process the logic. My brother, who hadn't booked a paying acting job in 2 years, needed a quiet bedroom to practice while I handled actual work that paid actual bills, including theirs. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "Right," I said. "Of course." Mom seemed to sense something in my tone because she reached across and patted my hand. "You know how proud we are of you, don't you? Having a daughter who's so successful, so independent. We brag about you all the time." "Do you?" "Oh, yes. Just last week at the grocery store, Mrs. Patterson was asking about you, and I told her all about your fancy job and your apartment in Brooklyn. She was so impressed." Independent. That word stuck with me as Mom continued talking about how well I was doing, how I'd figured everything out, how I didn't need the same kind of support that Marcus and Jenny required. Independent. Like it was a consolation prize for being ignored. Independent. Like it justified treating me as an afterthought. "Mom," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "Do you remember when Dad's hours got cut at the shop? About 3 years ago?" Her expression shifted slightly, and she set down her coffee cup. "That was a difficult time. We were worried about the house payments." "Right. And then suddenly everything was fine. The payments started going through again. Well, yes, your father's retirement fund." She trailed off, and I saw the exact moment when she realized where this conversation was heading. "Mom, there is no retirement fund. Dad's 401k barely covers your groceries." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Mom's hands fluttered to her throat, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when she was caught in something she didn't want to face. "Maya, I don't understand what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you. I've been paying your mortgage for 3 years, $1,500 a month, every month, from my checking account to yours." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might actually faint. That's impossible. We would have known." "You did know. You just didn't want to think about where the money was really coming from." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through months of automatic transfers. The evidence was all there, a neat digital trail of my money keeping. Their house afloat while they congratulated themselves on managing their finances. "Look," I said, turning the screen toward her. Mom stared at the numbers, her breathing shallow. "Maya, why didn't you tell us?" "I did tell you. I said I wanted to help, that I was in a position to make things easier for you." You just assumed it was a one-time thing. But 3 years? 3 years of mortgage payments, plus Marcus's car payment when he couldn't make it, plus the kids' summer camp fees, plus the new washer and dryer last Christmas, plus about 50 other things that you needed and I provided without making you feel bad about it. She was crying now, quiet tears that she kept wiping away with the back of her hand. We never asked you to do all that. No, you didn't ask. You just expected it. And when I showed up yesterday after driving 2 hours to be here, you put me in the garage like I was some distant relative you were doing a favor for. Maya, we didn't mean... Yes, you did mean it. You meant it because you don't actually see me as part of this family. You see me as the cash machine who happens to share your DNA. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but once they were in the air, I realized how true they felt. For 3 years, I'd been funding their lifestyle while convincing myself it was love. But love doesn't stick you in a garage. Love doesn't exclude you from family photos. Love doesn't take your money and then act like you should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you receive. Mom was sobbing now, the kind of crying that shakes your whole body. We never meant for you to feel that way. We're so grateful for everything you've done. Are you? Because grateful families don't treat their benefactors like inconveniences. I closed my laptop and stood up, needing distance from her tears and the guilt they were designed to make me feel. This was the family pattern, the cycle I'd been trapped in my whole life. Whenever I expressed any dissatisfaction, any hurt, the response was always to make me feel bad for feeling bad. Maya, please sit down. Let's talk about this. We are talking about it. I'm telling you that I've been supporting this family financially while being treated like I don't matter, and you're crying because you got caught. That's not fair. Fair? I turned back to face her. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been a thank you. Fair would have been acknowledging what I was doing instead of pretending Dad's magical retirement fund was paying for everything. Fair would have been giving me a real bed instead of making me sleep next to a lawnmower. We can move you inside today. Marcus can take the garage. That's not the point. The words exploded out of me, months of suppressed frustration finally breaking free. The point is that you didn't think I deserved a real bed in the first place. The point is that my unemployed brother got priority over the daughter who's been keeping this house from foreclosure. Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. Maya, lower your voice. You'll wake everyone up. God forbid we disturb Marcus's beauty sleep. He needs to be well rested for his audition practice. I heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Jenny coming down in her pajamas, her hair in a messy topknot and her face puffy with sleep. What's going on down here? You guys are being really loud. Maya's upset about the sleeping arrangements, Mom said quickly, shooting me a look that clearly meant, please don't make this worse. Oh. Jenny looked between us, taking in Mom's tear-streaked face and my obvious anger. Well, we can figure something out. Maybe the kids can share a bed, and you can have the other twin. It's not about the bed, I said. Then what is it about? I looked at my sister, this woman who'd had 2 kids she couldn't afford and somehow expected the rest of us to pick up the slack, and felt something cold settle in my chest. It's about the fact that I've been paying for Mom and Dad's mortgage for 3 years, and Marcus's car payment, and your kids' summer camp, and probably a dozen other things I've forgotten about. And in return, I get treated like a second-class citizen at our own family reunion. Jenny's mouth fell open. You've been paying the mortgage? Among other things. Mom, is this true? Mom nodded miserably. We didn't know it was so much. We thought it was just occasional help. Occasional help? Jenny's voice was getting higher. Maya, how much money are we talking about? I did the math quickly in my head. Probably close to $60,000 over the past 3 years, maybe more. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds waking up outside. Jenny sank into one of the kitchen chairs, looking stunned. Jesus, Maya, why didn't you say anything? I did say things. I said I wanted to help. I said I was happy to contribute. You all just assumed I meant like bringing a casserole to dinner, not funding your entire lifestyle. We never asked you to fund our lifestyle, Jenny said, but her voice lacked conviction. Didn't you? When your kids needed camp fees and David's commission check was late, who did you call? When Marcus's car got repossessed and he needed money. For a new one, who co-signed the loan? When Mom and Dad were panicking about the mortgage, who stepped in to fix it? We thought, you make good money, and you don't have kids or a mortgage of your own. So that makes it okay? Because I chose a different life path, I'm automatically responsible for subsidizing everyone else's choices? Jenny didn't answer, but I could see the wheels turning in her head, probably calculating how much of her family's security had been built on my silent contributions. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking rumpled and confused. What's all the yelling about? Some of us are trying to sleep. Maya's been paying our mortgage, Jenny said flatly. What? For 3 years, plus your car, plus basically everything else we couldn't afford. Marcus looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maya, is that true? It's true. Why didn't you tell me yesterday when we were talking? I told you some of it. I told you about the mortgage. But not everything. No, not everything. Because it's embarrassing to admit that your family only values you for your bank account. That's not true, Mom said, her voice thick with tears. We love you. Do you? Because if this is what love looks like in the Chen family, I think I'd rather be an orphan. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to take back. Mom's face crumpled, and even Marcus looked shocked at my vehemence. Maya, Jenny said carefully, we never meant for you to feel that way. But I do feel that way. I feel like the family ATM who occasionally gets invited to dinner. I feel like my only value to any of you is what I can provide financially. That's not fair, Marcus said. We care about you. Do you? When was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed something, not because there was a crisis, just because you wanted to talk to your sister? The silence that followed was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said. I picked up my laptop and headed toward the stairs, needing to put some physical distance between myself and their shocked faces before I said something even worse. Maya, where are you going? Mom called after me. To pack. I think I'm going. To head back to the city early. But the reunion is today. Everyone's expecting you. I stopped halfway up the stairs and turned back to look at them. 3 people who shared my genetics but somehow felt like strangers. Everyone's expecting me to show up, smile, and pretend everything's fine while you all take credit for the life I've built. But I'm done pretending. I'm done being grateful for being treated like garbage by people who should love me unconditionally. Maya, please, Mom said. Let's talk about this. We can work it out. Can we? Because I've been trying to work it out for years, and all it's gotten me is a concrete floor and a side of guilt when I finally ask for basic respect. I continued up the stairs, leaving them in the kitchen to process what had just happened. In the guest bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like relief. For the first time in my adult life, I'd told my family exactly how I felt. I'd laid out the truth without softening it or apologizing for taking up space. And while the conversation had been painful, there was something liberating about finally being honest about the dynamic that had been slowly suffocating me for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. How's the family torture festival going? I typed back, I think I just started a war. Good, came her immediate response. Some wars are worth fighting. As I headed back downstairs to face whatever Aftermath was waiting for me. I realized she was right. This war had been building for years, funded by my silence and their willingness to take advantage of it. Maybe it was time to stop being the family peacekeeper and start being the person who demanded the respect she'd earned. The kitchen was empty when I returned, but I could hear urgent whispers coming from the living room. They were probably trying to figure out damage control, how to manage the crisis I'd just created by telling the truth. Part of me felt guilty for disrupting the carefully maintained fiction that kept our family functioning, but a bigger part of me felt free. I made myself another cup of coffee and sat back down at the kitchen island, opening my laptop to finish the work I'd been trying to complete before my world shifted on its axis. But as I stared at the spreadsheet on my screen, all I could think about was another set of numbers. $60,000, 3 years of mortgage payments, countless smaller contributions that had added up to a sum that could have been a down payment on my own house, or a year of travel, or any number of things that would have enriched my life instead of enabling theirs. For the first time since, I'd started helping my family financially. I let myself imagine what my life would look like if I stopped. If I kept my money for myself, built my own security, invested in my own future instead of theirs. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Dogs barking, cars starting, the ordinary rhythm of a Saturday morning that had nothing to do with family drama or financial revelations. In a few hours, the community center would be full of Chen family members who had no idea that the foundation of our apparent success was built on one person's silent sacrifice. I wondered how many of them would still be impressed by Mom and Dad's financial stability if they knew the truth. I wondered how many of them would still see Marcus as the charming dreamer if they knew his sister was subsidizing his chase for stardom. I wondered how many of them would still think Jenny had it all figured out if they knew her children's activities were being funded by their aunt's guilty sense of obligation. But mostly, I wondered why I had spent so many years protecting everyone else's dignity at the expense of my own. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my boss, probably calling about the client presentation that was rapidly becoming the least of my problems. Maya, thank God you picked up. Did you get Emma's text about the meeting change? Yes, I'm working on the models now. Great. How are the numbers looking? I glanced around the kitchen of the house I'd been paying for, thinking about the family upstairs who had been benefiting from my success while treating me like an inconvenience. The numbers are very revealing, I said. I think it's time for some significant changes in resource allocation. Excellent. That's exactly what the client wants to hear. If only he knew how many clients I was about to disappoint. I spent the next 2 hours finishing my work presentation, but my mind kept drifting to the conversation in the kitchen and the shocked faces of my family when they realized the extent of my financial support. The numbers on my laptop screen seemed to mock me with their precision, while my real life felt like it was spiraling out of control. Around 9 o'clock, I heard movement upstairs and the familiar sounds of a house full of people getting ready for a big day. Shower running, hair dryers humming, voices calling back and forth about missing shoes and forgotten makeup. The Chen Family Reunion machine was gearing up for its annual performance, and I was sitting in the kitchen like a ghost haunting her own life. Marcus was the first to venture downstairs, looking uncharacteristically serious. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me, fidgeting with his phone in a way that suggested he'd been sent as an advance scout. "So," he said finally, "that was quite a conversation this morning. Was it?" I didn't look up from my laptop. "Maya, I want you to know that I had no idea about the extent of what you've been doing. If I'd known you were carrying that much." "You would have what? Stopped letting me pay for your car?" He winced. "I would have said thank you. I would have acknowledged it." "Would you? Or would you have just felt guilty about it while still taking the money?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression, something that looked almost like maturity. "You're right to be angry," he said. "We've been taking advantage of you." "Have you?" Yes. And the worst part is, we convinced ourselves it was okay because you never complained. Because you seemed fine with it. I wasn't fine with it. I was enabling it because I thought that's what family meant. What does family mean? I closed my laptop and really looked at him. This 32-year-old man who had been living like a teenager for the past decade while his younger sister funded his dreams. I thought it meant supporting each other, taking care of each other. But somewhere along the way, it became me taking care of everyone else while no one took care of me. That's not true. We care about you. Do you? When was the last time you asked me about my life? Not my job, not whether I was making enough money to keep helping you guys, but my actual life. What I want, what I'm afraid of, what makes me happy. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I can't remember, he admitted finally. Neither can I. Jenny appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the reunion in a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked like she'd been crying, her makeup carefully applied to cover the evidence. Maya, we need to talk. We talked this morning. Not like that. Really talk. All of us. She settled into one of the kitchen chairs, and I noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. Jenny had always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts, and kept everyone focused on maintaining appearances. This situation was probably her worst nightmare. I've been thinking about what you said, she continued. About the money, about how we've been treating you, and you're right, we've been horrible. I didn't say you were horrible. You didn't have to. The facts speak for themselves. Mom appeared in the doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen. Her. She'd aged years in the span of a few hours, the weight of our conversation etched in the lines around her eyes. I called your father, she said quietly. He's coming home from his golf game. Mom, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. This family needs to have a real conversation about what's been happening here. She sat down at the table, and suddenly we were all gathered in the kitchen like we used to be when we were kids, and someone was in trouble. Except this time, it wasn't clear who was getting lectured. Maya, Mom said, I want you to know that I've been awake all night thinking about what you told me. About the money. About how we've been treating you. Mom, no, let me finish. You were right about everything. We have been taking advantage of you. We have been treating you like you don't matter. And we have been justifying it by telling ourselves that you're so successful, so independent, that you don't need the same consideration we give everyone else. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt that familiar tug of guilt, the urge to comfort her and tell her it was okay. But I pushed it down. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about years of my feelings being ignored. The thing is, I said carefully, I've been successful because I've had to be. Because I learned early that my value in this family was tied to what I could provide, not who I was. That's not true, Jenny protested. Isn't it? Think about our conversations. Jenny, when do you call me? When do any of you reach out? She thought about it, and I watched the realization dawn on her face. When we need something. When you need something. Money, babysitting, someone to co-sign a loan, someone to cover a bill. When was the last time you called just to catch up? She faltered. I don't know. I do. It was 2 years ago, when you thought David was cheating on you and you needed someone to talk to. And even then, the conversation ended with you asking if I could help with Emma's dental bills. My Jenny's face flushed red. Maya, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. That's the problem. None of you realized because none of you were paying attention to anything except what I could do for you. Dad walked through the back door, still in his golf clothes and looking confused about why he'd been summoned home for a family emergency. He stopped short when he saw all of us gathered around the kitchen table with serious faces. What's going on? Linda said there was some kind of crisis. Sit down, Bob, Mom said. We need to talk. Dad took off his golf cap and sat down, looking wary. Is someone sick? Is there a problem with the reunion? The problem is with us, Mom said, with how we've been treating Maya. I watched Dad's face as Mom explained the morning's revelations, saw the progression from confusion to shock to something that looked like shame. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his hands. Maya, he said finally, is this true? About the mortgage payments? It's true. For 3 years? 3 years and 2 months. He rubbed his forehead like he was developing a headache. Why didn't you tell us it was that much? I did tell you. I told you I wanted to help, that I was in a position to make things easier. You just didn't ask for details because you didn't want to feel guilty about accepting it. But we should have felt guilty, Dad said quietly. We should have been paying more attention. Yes, you should have. The directness of my response seemed to surprise him. I'd spent so many years softening my words, making everyone else comfortable with their choices. That simple honesty felt radical. What do you want us to do? Jenny asked. How do we fix this? I looked around the table at these people who had shaped my entire understanding of what family meant, who had taught me that love was measured in sacrifice, and that my worth was tied to my usefulness. I don't know if you can fix it, I said. This isn't something that happened overnight. This is years of patterns, years of you taking what I offered and asking for more without ever considering what it was costing me. We can pay you back, Dad said quickly. It might take time, but we can... I don't want you to pay me back. I want you to understand why I'm so angry. Then help us understand, Mom said. Tell us what we need to know. I took a deep breath, trying to find words for feelings I'd been suppressing for years. I want you to understand that I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn a place in this family that should have been mine by birthright. I've given you money, time, energy, pieces of myself, hoping that eventually you'd see me as more than just the reliable daughter who fixes problems. Maya, we do see you as more than that, Jenny said. Do you? Because last night, when you were posting pictures of family time on Facebook, where was I? I was 20 feet away in the garage, but I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't even missed. Jenny's face went pale. I didn't think... That's exactly right. You didn't think. None of you thought about whether I was comfortable, whether I felt included, whether I might want some recognition for everything I've been doing to keep this family afloat. We're thinking about it now, Marcus said. Are you? Or are you just trying to figure out how to manage this crisis so things can go back to normal? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could see them processing it, weighing their real motivations against what they thought they should say. Maya, Dad said slowly, what do you want from us? What would make this right? It was a fair question, but I realized I didn't have a simple answer. What I wanted was years of different choices, years of being seen and valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. What I wanted was a family that would have given me a real bed without being asked, that would have included me in their photos, that would have checked on my well-being with the same intensity they devoted to their own needs. I want to matter, I said finally. I want to be more than the family bank. I want you to care about my happiness, my comfort, my life, not just what I can do for yours. We do care, Mom said, tears starting again. Then show me. Don't tell. Me, show me. How? I stood up from the table, suddenly exhausted by the weight of having to explain basic human decency to people who should have understood it instinctively. I don't know, Mom. You're going to have to figure that out yourselves. But I can tell you that it starts with treating me like I belong here, like I'm a valued member of this family rather than a convenient resource. I walked toward the stairs, needing space to think, but Dad's voice stopped me. Maya, what about the reunion today? What about the family? I turned back to face them. These people I loved despite everything. These people who had somehow taught me that love was something you had to earn rather than something you deserved. "The family will be fine," I said. "You've all been managing your problems without really including me for years. This is just making it official." "That's not fair," Jenny said. "You're punishing all of us for something we didn't realize we were doing." "No, I'm protecting myself from people who didn't care enough to realize what they were doing. There's a difference." I went upstairs to collect my things from the garage, moving through the concrete space that had served as my bedroom and wondering how I'd convinced myself that this was acceptable. The air mattress was still deflated from my restless night, and my clothes were wrinkled from being packed in a suitcase that had never been fully unpacked. It looked like the accommodations you'd give to someone you barely tolerated, not someone you claimed to love. As I folded my clothes back into the suitcase, I could hear voices drifting up from the kitchen, urgent whispers that suggested they were trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Part of me wanted to go back downstairs and comfort them, to smooth over the conflict I'd created and restore the peace that had been bought with my silence. But I didn't. For the first time in my adult life, I let them sit with the discomfort of their own choices. I let them figure out how to manage a crisis without expecting me to fix it for them. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Status report?" "Heading home early," I typed back. "Burned some bridges." "Good bridges to burn?" I looked around. The garage one last time, at the concrete floor and the motor oil stains and the boxes of Christmas decorations that had been my roommates for 2 nights. "The best bridges," I replied. I was loading my suitcase into my car when Uncle Tommy's pickup truck pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Aunt Patty's sedan. The cavalry was arriving for the reunion, and from the looks on their faces, as they got out of their vehicles, word of this morning's drama had already reached them. Uncle Tommy approached me with the careful expression of someone walking into a minefield. He was Dad's younger brother, stockier and louder, with the kind of personality that filled up rooms and made children laugh. But right now, he looked uncertain in a way I'd rarely seen. "Maya, sweetheart, your mom called. She said there was some kind of misunderstanding about money?" Misunderstanding. I almost laughed at the euphemism. Trust my family to turn years of financial exploitation into a simple miscommunication. Not a misunderstanding, Uncle Tommy. Just some long overdue honesty about who's been paying for what around here. Aunt Patty joined us, her face creased with concern. She'd always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts, with casseroles and concerned phone calls. "Honey, I'm sure whatever happened, we can work it out. Family fights, but family also forgives." "Do they?" "Because I've been forgiving for 3 years while funding everyone else's life. Maybe it's time for someone else to do the forgiving." Uncle Tommy's eyebrows shot up. "Funding everyone's life? Maya, what exactly are we talking about here?" Before I could answer, Dad emerged from the house looking like he'd aged a decade since his golf game. Behind him came the rest of my immediate family, a parade of guilty faces and defensive postures. "Tommy, Patty, thank God you're here," Mom said, her voice strained. "We're having a bit of a family situation." So, I gathered, Maya was just telling us about some money issues. I could see the calculation happening in Dad's eyes, the weighing of how much truth to reveal versus how much face to save. In the end, his natural honesty won out. "Maya's been paying our mortgage for 3 years," he said quietly, "along with other bills we couldn't cover. We didn't realize how much it was adding up to." The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Tommy's mouth fell open, and Aunt Patty actually took a step backward like she'd been physically struck. 3 years? Uncle Tommy repeated. "Bob, how is that possible?" "We thought it was temporary help," Mom said quickly. "We thought it was just until we got back on our feet." $60,000, I said, since we were apparently doing full disclosure now. That's how much temporary help cost me. Aunt Patty made a small gasping sound. Maya, $60,000. Honey, that's a fortune. Yes, it is. It's also the cost of keeping this family's pride intact while I slept in the garage and got excluded from family photos. You slept in the garage? Uncle Tommy's voice was getting louder, the way it did when he was getting angry. Bob, what the hell were you thinking? Now hold on, Dad said, his own defensiveness rising. The house was full and Maya said she didn't mind. I never said I didn't. Mind? I interrupted. I said it was fine because that's what I've been trained to say my entire life. There's a difference. More cars were arriving now. Cousins and extended family members who had come for what they thought would be a typical Chen family reunion. Instead, they were walking into a full-scale family civil war playing out in the driveway. Cousin Dylan climbed out of his beat-up Honda, took one look at the assembled faces, and immediately tried to back away. Should I come back later? This looks like a private conversation. No, stay, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Everyone should hear this. Everyone should know exactly how this family operates. Maya, Mom said sharply, there's no need to air our private business. Isn't there? Because keeping our private business private is how we got into this mess. Everyone thinking Dad and Mom were doing so well financially, everyone admiring Marcus for following his dreams, everyone praising Jenny for having it all figured out. Meanwhile, I was the family secret, the invisible foundation holding everything up. More family members were gathering now, drawn by the raised voices and the obvious tension. Grandma Rose emerged from Aunt Patty's car, moving slowly but with the determined gait of someone who had lived through enough family drama to recognize a crisis when she saw one. At 82, Grandma Rose was still the undisputed matriarch of the Chen family. Her word carried weight that even my parents respected, and her approval was something everyone sought. She surveyed the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing, taking in the suitcase in my hand, the tears on Mom's face, and the defensive postures of my siblings. "What's all this commotion?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular authority that comes with age and experience. "Nothing, Grandma," Jenny said quickly. "Just a little family disagreement." $60,000 isn't a little disagreement, I said, tired of the euphemisms and the attempts to minimize what had happened. Grandma Rose's eyebrows shot up. $60,000? That's how much I've spent keeping this family afloat over the past 3 years, while they treated me like I was doing them a minor favor. The old woman's expression shifted, and I saw something that looked like recognition flash across her features. "Maya, come here." I walked over to her, and she placed a weathered hand on my arm, studying my face with the intensity of someone reading a familiar story. "You've been carrying them," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And they've been letting you?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, then turned to face the rest of the family with the kind of expression that had probably terrified my father when he was a child. "Shame on all of you," she said, her voice cutting through the humid summer air like a blade. "Shame on every single one of you." "Mom," Dad started, but she held up a hand that silenced him immediately. "Don't mom me, Robert. I raised you better than this. I raised you to protect your family, not exploit them." "We weren't exploiting," Mom began. "Weren't you? Taking money from your youngest daughter for years while putting her in the garage. Like she's some unwelcome house guest? What would you call that?" The gathering family members shifted uncomfortably, and I could see the realization dawning on faces around the driveway. This wasn't just about sleeping arrangements or hurt feelings. This was about systematic financial abuse disguised as family loyalty. "Grandma, it's more complicated than that," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty simple. Maya has been funding your lives while you've been taking her for granted. And now that she's finally standing up for herself, you're all acting like she's the problem." Dylan stepped forward, looking confused. "Wait, Maya's been paying for stuff? Like what stuff? The mortgage, I said, figuring we might as well get everything out in the open. Marcus's car payments, Jenny's kids' summer camp, probably half the groceries in that house. Whatever crisis needed funding, I was the go-to solution. Jesus, Maya, Dylan said, running a hand through his hair. I had no idea. Nobody had any idea because nobody wanted to have any idea. It was easier to just accept the help and not ask questions about where it was coming from or what it was costing me. Uncle Tommy was shaking his head, looking disgusted. Bob, how could you let this happen? How could you take that much money from your own daughter? We didn't mean for it to get so out of hand, Dad said weakly. But it did get out of hand, Grandma Rose said. And instead of acknowledging it, instead of being grateful, you put her in the garage. You excluded her from your family pictures. You treated her like she was disposable. That's not what we meant to do, Jenny protested. But it's what you did, I said. And when I finally called you out on it, your first instinct was to make me feel guilty for speaking up. More cars were arriving, but the new arrivals were keeping their distance, sensing the tension and unsure whether to approach. The Chen Family Reunion was turning into a public spectacle, and I could see the horror on Mom's face as she realized how many people were witnessing our dirty laundry being aired. Maya, please, she said quietly. Can we discuss this inside? As a family? We are discussing it as a family. This is what families do when they've been lying to each other for years. We weren't lying. Yes, you were. You were lying about where the money was coming from. You were lying about Dad's retirement fund. You were lying about being able to afford your lifestyle. And you were lying to yourselves about what kind of people you'd become. The words hit like physical blows, and I watched my parents flinch with each accusation. But I wasn't done. 3 years of suppressed frustration were pouring out of me like water through a broken dam. Do you want to know what the worst part is? It's not the money. It's not even the garage. It's the fact that you convinced yourselves this was normal. That taking and taking and taking from me while giving nothing back was just how families worked. We gave you love, Mom said desperately. Did you? Because love doesn't come with conditions. Love doesn't require me to fund your mortgage to earn a seat at the table. Grandma Rose was nodding approvingly, and I could see Uncle Tommy and Aunt Patty exchanging looks that suggested they were finally understanding the full scope of what had been happening. Maya's right, Uncle Tommy said finally. This isn't how families are supposed to work. Easy for you to say, Marcus snapped, his defensiveness finally breaking through. You don't know what it's like to struggle, to need help from family. I know exactly what it's like to struggle, Uncle Tommy shot back. I've been running a restaurant for 15 years. You think that's easy? But I never expected my niece to bail me out while I sat around waiting for my acting career to take off. That's not fair, Marcus said, but there was no conviction in his voice. You want to talk about fair? Dylan spoke up, and everyone turned to look at him. At 25, he was the youngest adult in the family, still in college, but working part-time to pay his own expenses. Fair would be acknowledging that Maya's been supporting all of you while working her ass off in one of the most expensive cities in the country. Fair would be treating her like the family hero instead of the family afterthought. Dylan, Dad started. No, Uncle Bob, let me finish. I've been watching this family dynamic for years, wondering why Maya always seemed like she was on the outside looking in. Now I know why. You've been using her. The word hung in the air like an accusation, stark and undeniable. Using. Not helping, not supporting, not even taking advantage. Using. Like I was a resource to be exploited rather, than a person to be loved. That's a terrible thing to say, Jenny said, but her voice was shaking. It's a terrible thing to do, Dylan shot back. And it's been going on for years. I looked around at the faces of my extended family, seeing the shock and disappointment and growing anger on their behalf. These people, who I'd been worried would judge me for disrupting the reunion, were instead judging my parents and siblings for creating a situation that needed disrupting. "Maya," Aunt Patty said gently, "why didn't you tell us what was happening? We would have helped." "Would you? Or would you have told me that family takes care of family and I should be grateful to be in a position to help?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I hope we would have done better than that. I hope we would have seen what this was costing you. But you didn't see it. None of you saw it because it was easier not to look too closely at why Bob and Linda were suddenly doing so well financially, or why Marcus could afford a new car, or why Jenny's kids got to go to expensive summer camps. The truth of that statement settled over the group like a weight. Everyone had benefited from my silence, from my willingness to support the family fiction that everything was fine. "So what happens now?" Uncle Tommy asked. "Where do we go from here?" It was a good question, and I realized I didn't have a complete answer. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the way things had been, couldn't pretend that this conversation hadn't happened, or that the fundamental dynamic of our family hadn't been exposed. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just know that I can't keep funding everyone else's life while being treated like I don't matter." "You do matter," Mom said desperately. "Maya, you matter so much to us." "Then show me. Stop telling me how much I matter and start treating me like I matter." "How? What do you want us to do?" I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to be generous and helpful and self-sacrificing, and realized that she genuinely didn't understand what I was asking for. "I want you to see me," I said simply. "Not as your financial safety net, not as the reliable daughter who fixes problems, but as a person with my own needs and feelings and boundaries." "We do see you." "No, you don't. If you saw me, you wouldn't have put me in the garage. If you saw me, you would have included me in your family photos. If you saw me, you would have checked on my happiness with the same energy you devoted to managing your own comfort." The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. Around us, the neighborhood was coming alive with the sounds of a normal Saturday, lawnmowers starting and children playing, the ordinary rhythm of life that had nothing to do with family revelations or financial reckonings. "Maya, Grandma," Rose said quietly, "what do you need from us today? Right now, what would help?" I looked at this woman who had lived through wars and depressions and decades of family drama, who understood that sometimes love meant making hard choices and uncomfortable admissions. "I need space," I said. "I need time to figure out what this family looks like when I'm not holding it together financially." "You're leaving," Dad said. It wasn't a question. "I'm leaving. The reunion, the financial support, all of it. I'm going. Back to my life and figuring out what it feels like to live for myself instead of for everyone else." "Maya, please," Jenny said, tears starting again. "Don't punish our kids for our mistakes." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." I picked up my suitcase and started walking toward my car, the weight of 3 years of financial burden already feeling lighter on my shoulders. "Maya," Mom called after me. "What about the mortgage? What about the bills?" I stopped and turned back to face them one last time. These people who had taught me that love was conditional and worth was measured in dollars. "Figure it out," I said. "The same way you'd figure it out if I'd never existed in the first place." As I drove away from Millbrook, watching the Chen Family Reunion dissolve into chaos in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. The freedom that comes from finally telling the truth, even when the truth is ugly and painful and changes everything. My phone started ringing almost immediately, call after call from family members trying to fix what couldn't be fixed with a simple conversation. I let them all go to voicemail, focusing instead on the road ahead and the life I was finally ready to build for myself. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my Brooklyn apartment with Alex, sharing takeout Chinese food and catching up on everything that had happened since the reunion disaster. The evening light was filtering through our windows, painting everything, in shades of gold that made even our cramped living room feel warm and welcoming. "So let me get this straight," Alex said, poking at her lo mein with chopsticks. "Your entire family has been calling you. Your parents are behind on the mortgage, and your brother had to move back home because he can't afford his car payments without your help." "That's about the size of it," I said, feeling surprisingly calm about the chaos I'd left in my wake. "And how do you feel about all that?" I considered the question seriously, taking inventory of my emotional state. 3 weeks ago, the thought of my family struggling financially would have sent me into a panic of guilt and responsibility. Now, it just felt like the natural consequence of choices they'd been making for years. "I feel free," I said finally. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel like my money is actually mine." "Have you talked to any of them?" "Grandma Rose called yesterday. She wanted to make sure I was okay and to tell me she's proud of me for standing up for myself. Smart woman. She also said my parents are starting to understand the scope of what they've lost. Not just the money, but the relationship. Apparently, Dad cried when he realized I'd been paying for the family vacation last year while staying home to work." Alex shook her head. "Better late than never, I guess." "I suppose. But understanding and changing are two different things." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it automatically. It was from Marcus. "Maya, can we talk? I want to apologize properly." I showed Alex the message, and she raised an eyebrow. That's progress, at least. Is it? Or is it just another attempt to manage the crisis until things can go back to normal? Only one way to find out. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside without responding. I wasn't ready for apologies yet, especially not apologies that came 3 weeks after the fact when the financial consequences were starting to bite. "You know what's weird?" I said, settling back into the couch. "I thought I'd feel guilty about cutting them off financially. I thought I'd be lying awake at night worrying about whether they were okay. But you're not?" "No. I'm sleeping better than I have in years. I'm actually looking forward to opening my bank statements instead of dreading them." It was true. For the first time since college, I was living entirely within my own means, spending money on things I wanted instead of things my family needed. I'd bought new clothes without calculating whether I could afford them after the mortgage payment. I'd made plans to visit friends in other cities without worrying about upcoming family emergencies. I'd even started looking at apartments with better natural light and closer proximity to good restaurants. "What about work?" Alex asked. "How are things going there?" "Better than ever, actually. Turns out I'm a lot more focused when I'm not. Constantly stressed about family finances. I got promoted last week." "Maya, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" "I guess I'm still adjusting to having good news that's actually mine to celebrate." The promotion had come with a significant salary increase and additional responsibilities that excited rather than overwhelmed me. For years, I'd been turning down advancement opportunities because they required travel or longer hours that might interfere with my family obligations. Now, with no one else's needs to consider, I was free to pursue the career I'd always wanted. "Have you heard anything about the reunion aftermath?" Alex asked. "Uncle Tommy called the other day. Apparently, it was quite the spectacle after I left. Half the family was taking my side, and the other half was trying to figure out how to fix things without actually acknowledging what went wrong." "And your immediate family?" "Still in denial, mostly. Jenny keeps leaving voicemails about how I'm overreacting and hurting the kids. Marcus sends philosophical texts about family and forgiveness. Mom keeps calling to tell me she understands now and wants to make things right." What about your dad?" Radio silence. I think he's too ashamed to reach out directly." My laptop chimed with an email notification, and I glanced at it absently. It was from my bank, confirming the automatic transfer I'd set up to move my mortgage payment money into a high-yield savings account. In 3 weeks, I'd already saved more than I'd managed to accumulate in the previous 2 years. "You know what I realized?" I said, closing the laptop. "I was so focused on being a good daughter that I forgot to be a good steward of my own life." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was prioritizing everyone else's financial security while neglecting my own. I don't have a retirement fund because I was funding my parents' lifestyle. I don't own property because I was paying their mortgage. I haven't traveled because I was always saving for the next family crisis." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "It's like you were living their life instead of yours." "Exactly. And the crazy thing is, they all convinced themselves that I was the lucky one, the successful one who had it all figured out. When really you were just the one carrying everyone else." My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from Millbrook. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker. "Maya, this is Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from your mother. I just wanted you to know that what you did at the reunion was brave. My husband and I have been watching your family for years, wondering how your parents were managing so well financially. And now we understand. You've been carrying them, and they should have been grateful instead of taking you for granted. I hope you're taking care of yourself now." Alex and I looked at each other in surprise. "Random grocery store lady is Team Maya," Alex said with a grin. "It's not random," I said, thinking about the small-town dynamics I'd grown up with. In a place like Millbrook, everyone knows everyone else's business. They probably all suspected something was off about my family's sudden financial stability. And now they know the truth. Over the next few days, I received similar calls and messages from various Millbrook residents. My high school English teacher, who remembered me as a hardworking student, wanted to express her support. The woman who ran the local coffee shop mentioned that she'd always wondered why such a successful young woman seemed so stressed during family visits. Even the mailman left a voicemail saying he'd noticed my car in the driveway during financial crisis periods and had put 2 and 2 together. It was gratifying to realize that other people had seen what my family had chosen to ignore. But it was also sad to understand that my exploitation had been visible to strangers while remaining invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 month after the reunion. I was working late at my kitchen table, finally feeling comfortable taking on extra projects now that I wasn't constantly worried about family emergencies, when my phone rang with a call from Uncle Tommy. "Maya, I hope you don't mind me calling." "Of course not, Uncle Tommy. How are you?" "I'm good, but I'm calling about your parents. They asked me to reach out because they weren't sure you'd take their call directly." I sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern. Even now, they couldn't approach me directly but had to go through an intermediary. "What's going on?" "They want to meet with you, to talk, really talk, about what happened and what needs to change going forward." "Uncle Tommy, we've already talked." I told them how I felt, and they made it clear that they thought I was overreacting. That was a month ago. Things have changed since then. Have they? "Maya, your father lost 15 pounds in the past month. Your mother hasn't been sleeping. They're finally understanding what they lost when they lost you." "They didn't lose me. They threw me away." "I know it feels like that, and maybe it was like that. But they're different now. This whole thing has forced them to look at themselves in a way they've never had to before." I was quiet for a moment, considering. Part of me was curious about what this conversation would look like, whether they'd actually gained any real insight or if this was just another attempt to restore the status quo. What exactly are they proposing? They want to meet somewhere neutral. Not the house, not your apartment, but somewhere you'd feel comfortable. They want to listen to you, really listen. And they want to figure out how to have a relationship. That doesn't involve money. "A relationship that doesn't involve money," I repeated. "Do they understand what that means?" I think they're starting to. Maya, I've known your parents my whole life, and I've never seen them as humbled as they are right now. This isn't about getting you to resume the financial support. This is about understanding why they lost their daughter. I found myself considering it despite my better judgment. Not because I was ready to forgive and forget, but because I was curious about whether they were capable of the kind of fundamental change that would be required to rebuild our relationship. If I agreed to meet with them, it would have to be on my terms, I said finally. Of course, whatever you need. I want Grandma Rose there, and I want it to be clear that this isn't about reconciliation. This is about them understanding why their behavior was unacceptable and what it would take for us to have any kind of relationship going forward. I'll relay that to them. Maya, for what it's worth, I think you're being more than fair. A lot of people would have cut them off permanently. Maybe I should have, but you didn't. And that says something about the kind of person you are. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about what kinds of people we all were. My parents, who had convinced themselves that using their daughter was the same as loving her. My siblings, who had benefited from my generosity while resenting my success. And me, who had enabled their behavior for years before finally finding the courage to walk away. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a conference room at the Millbrook Public Library, waiting for what might be the most important conversation of my adult life. I'd chosen the location because it was public enough to feel safe, but private enough for honest discussion. Grandma Rose arrived first, settling into the chair beside me with the kind of quiet dignity that had always made me feel protected. "How are you holding up?" she asked, squeezing my hand gently. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "I don't know what to expect from this." "Expect honesty," she said simply. "From them and from yourself." My parents arrived looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen them. Mom's usual confidence was replaced by something that looked almost like fear, and Dad seemed to have developed a nervous habit of rubbing his hands together. They took seats across from us, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Maya, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We know we don't deserve your time." "You're right," I said. "You don't. But I'm here because I want to understand whether you're capable of changing, or if this is just another attempt to manage me back into compliance." Mom flinched at the directness of my words, but she didn't argue. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since the reunion, about what you said, about how we've been treating you. And you were right about everything," Dad said quietly. "We did take advantage of you. We did treat you like you were disposable, and we justified it by telling ourselves that you were so successful, so independent, that you didn't need the same consideration we gave everyone else. Those aren't just words, Maya," Mom added. "We really understand now what we put you through." I studied their faces, looking for signs of the defensive anger that had characterized our previous conversations. Instead, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse. "Understanding is one thing," I said. "Changing is another. What exactly are you proposing?" "We want to rebuild our relationship with you," Mom said. "A real relationship, not one based on what you can do for us." "And what would that look like?" Dad leaned forward slightly. "It would start with us figuring out our own finances, without any help from you. We've already met with the bank about restructuring the mortgage, and I'm going back to work part-time." "What about Marcus? What about Jenny?" "They're adults," Mom said firmly. "It's time they started acting like it." Marcus moved back home," Dad added. "But he's paying rent now, and he's looking for steady work instead of just waiting for acting jobs." "And Jenny?" "Jenny is figuring out how to live within her means," Grandma Rose said. "It's been an adjustment for everyone." I nodded, processing this information. It sounded like the financial consequences of my departure had forced some long overdue reckonings. "That's all well and good," I said. but money was just the symptom. The real problem was that you never saw me as a whole person. You saw me as a resource. "You're right," Mom said, tears starting again. "And we want to learn how to do better." "How?" "By starting over," Dad said. "By getting to know you as the person you are now, not the daughter we think we remember. By treating you like you matter," Mom added. "Not because of what you can provide, but because of who you are." I looked at Grandma Rose, who was watching the exchange with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What do you think?" I asked her. "I think they mean it this time," she said carefully. "But meaning it and doing it consistently over time are different things." "So, what are you proposing?" I asked my parents. "Weekly therapy sessions, family meetings, some kind of formal accountability system?" "Whatever you think would help," Dad said. "Whatever you need to feel safe trusting us again." The word safe stuck with me. That's what had been missing from our family dynamic for years. My sense of safety. The security of knowing that I mattered for reasons beyond my utility, that my comfort and happiness were priorities rather than afterthoughts. "I need time," I said finally. "I need to see consistent change over months, not just good intentions after a crisis." "We understand," Mom said. "We'll wait as long as it takes. And I need you to understand that our relationship will never go back to what it was. I will never again be your financial safety net. I will never again sacrifice my own well-being for your comfort. We don't want that," Dad said. "We want something better. Do you? Because building something better is going to require you to examine some uncomfortable truths about yourselves and make some fundamental changes to how you operate as people." "We're ready for that," Mom said, though her voice shook slightly. I stood up from the table, feeling emotionally drained but also strangely hopeful. "Then we'll see. But this time, you're going to have to prove it with actions, not words." As I walked out of the library, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a willingness to leave the door open for the possibility that people could change, that families could heal, that love could be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependency. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and a view of Prospect Park that I'd been able to afford because I was finally keeping my money for myself. My parents and I had been meeting monthly, awkward but honest conversations that were slowly rebuilding trust. Marcus had gotten a steady job and was paying his own bills for the first time in years. Jenny was learning to live within her means and had actually thanked me for forcing the family to face reality. It wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But it was honest, and it was based on who we actually were, rather than who we thought we should be. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged in my own family, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a person to be valued. The best part, though, was discovering who I was when I wasn't carrying everyone else. I was funnier than I'd remembered, more adventurous, more willing to take risks and pursue dreams. I was a person with interests and opinions and boundaries, someone who deserved love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. As I watched the sunset paint the Brooklyn sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about the girl who had slept in the garage just 6 months earlier, and I felt proud of how far we'd both come. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their worst impulses. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is demand the respect you deserve. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those 2 acts of love can create space for something real and healthy to grow in place of what was broken. The drive back to Brooklyn felt like traveling through different dimensions of my life. Each mile I put between myself and Millbrook was another step away from the person I'd been trained to be, and towards someone I was only beginning to discover. My phone buzzed constantly on the passenger seat, calls and texts from family members trying to pull me back into their orbit, but I let them all fade into digital silence. By the time I reached my apartment building, The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting long shadows between the brownstones that had become more home to me than the house I'd been financially supporting for years. Alex was waiting on our front steps with 2 cups of coffee, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd been tracking my location and timing my arrival. "So," she said, handing me a cup as I climbed the steps, "how did the family torture festival end?" With me telling the entire extended family that I've been funding my parents' lifestyle while sleeping in their garage. Alex's eyebrows shot up. "Oh shit, how did that go over?" "About as well as you'd expect. Tears, denials, accusations that I was being dramatic, the usual family crisis management techniques." We settled onto the stoop, and I found myself breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in days. The city air, with its mixture of exhaust and possibility, tasted like freedom compared to the suffocating atmosphere of obligation I left behind. "And how do you feel about it?" I considered the question seriously, taking inventory of the emotions churning through my chest. "Terrified," I said finally, and relieved, and angry, and maybe a little proud. Proud? I finally said the things I've been thinking for years. I finally stopped protecting everyone else's feelings at the expense of my own. Alex nodded approvingly. "About damn time. What's the plan now?" That was the question that had been haunting me during the drive home. What was the plan when you'd just blown up the central organizing principle of your adult life? When you'd walked away from the role that had defined your relationship with everyone you'd grown up loving? "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "I've spent so many years being the family problem solver that I'm not sure who I am when I'm not. Fixing things for other people. Well, you're about to find out." The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in days and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The absence of dread. No morning anxiety about which family member might call with a crisis. No guilty calculation of how much money I could afford to send without compromising my own security. Just the ordinary calm of a Monday morning in Brooklyn, with coffee to make and work to focus on, and a life that was entirely my own. The first thing I did was open my laptop and cancel the automatic transfers that had been quietly draining my accounts for years. The mortgage payment to my parents' account, gone. The supplemental fund I'd set up for Marcus's emergencies, deleted. The college savings account I'd been contributing to for Jenny's kids, closed. Each cancellation felt like cutting an invisible cord that had been slowly strangling my financial independence. Then I did something I hadn't done since college. I calculated my actual disposable income. The number that appeared on my spreadsheet was so much larger than what I'd been living on that I had to double-check my math. For 3 years, I'd been living like someone who made $30,000 less than my actual salary, and I'd convinced myself that this was normal, that this was what responsible adults did for their families. The phone rang as I was staring at the numbers, and I saw my boss's name on the screen. For a moment, I panicked, wondering if somehow my family drama had reached my professional life. But then I remembered the client presentation I'd been working on over the weekend. "Maya, thank God I caught you. The Peterson account loved your revenue projections. They want to move forward with the full implementation, and they specifically requested that you lead the project team." That's wonderful," I said, still processing the idea that good things could happen in my life while my family was falling apart. It would mean a promotion, obviously. Senior analyst position, significant salary bump, and you'd have your own team. Are you interested? 6 months ago, I would have hesitated, worried about how the additional responsibilities might interfere with my family obligations. Today, I didn't even pause. Absolutely. When do we start? After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring out at the morning light filtering through my windows, and realized that this was what it felt like to make decisions based on what I wanted, instead of what everyone else needed. The promotion would require longer hours and occasional travel, things that would have been impossible when I was constantly on call for family emergencies. But now, with no one else's schedule to accommodate, I was free to pursue the career I'd always wanted. The celebration was short-lived. My phone started ringing again, and this time it was Marcus. "Maya, thank God you picked up. We need to talk about what happened yesterday." "Do we?" "You can't just walk away from family like this. We need to figure out how to fix things." "I'm not the one who needs to fix things, Marcus. I'm the one who's been fixing things for years while everyone else made the mess." "But the mortgage, Maya. Mom and Dad can't afford the house without your help." The desperation in his voice might have moved me a week ago. Today, it just sounded like more of the same manipulation that had kept me trapped in my role as the family ATM. Then maybe they shouldn't have bought a house they couldn't afford. Or maybe they should have thought about that before putting me in the garage while taking my money. You know that wasn't about the money. The sleeping arrangements were just what? A coincidence? "Marcus, I've been paying their mortgage for 3 years and they put me in a garage." That tells me everything I need to know about how much they value me as a person versus how much they value me as a bank account. "Maya, please, you're being dramatic." Dramatic. The word my family always used when I expressed any dissatisfaction with how I was being treated. Dramatic. Like my feelings were a performance rather than a legitimate response to being used. "No, Marcus, I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest about what this family dynamic actually is. We're not using you. Aren't you? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time any of you checked? On my happiness? My stress level? My life outside of what I could provide for you?" The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said. "Marcus, I love you, but I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm." "So what? You're just cutting us all off? You're abandoning your family?" "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm stopping the pattern where I give everything and receive nothing in return. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to have to be based on something other than what I can do for you." "Maya, you don't understand the pressure we're under. The bills, the stress, the way everything falls apart when we can't count on your help. And you don't understand the pressure I've been under, carrying all of you while pretending I was grateful for the privilege." I hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off my phone. I needed space from their voices, from their guilt trips, and their attempts to frame my financial exploitation as family loyalty. I needed time to remember who I was when I wasn't defined by other people's needs. The next few days passed in a strange bubble of quiet. Without the constant background anxiety of family drama, I found myself noticing things I'd been too stressed to pay attention to for years. The way the morning light hit my kitchen table, perfect for working. The bookstore on my corner that I'd walked past hundreds of times but never entered. The jazz trio that played in Prospect Park on Sunday afternoons, filling the air with music that made the city feel like home. I bought myself flowers for the first time in my adult life, not because it was a special occasion, but because I wanted flowers in my apartment, and I could afford them without calculating whether the money would be better spent on someone else's emergency. I went to a movie in the middle of the afternoon, something I'd always told myself was a luxury I couldn't justify. I made dinner reservations at a restaurant I'd been wanting to try for months, the kind of place I'd avoided because the money would have covered one of Jenny's kids' music lessons. Each small act of self-care felt revolutionary. Each choice I made for my own happiness instead of someone else's convenience was a declaration of independence from a role I'd never consciously agreed to play. On Thursday, Alex found me on the Phoebe fire escape outside our apartment, reading a book I'd bought for pleasure rather than professional development. "You look different," she said, settling beside me with her own coffee. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally put it down." She was right. The constant weight of other people's financial security had lifted from my shoulders, leaving me feeling almost weightless. For years, I'd woken up every morning mentally calculating how much money I had available for the next family crisis, how much of my paycheck was already spoken for before I'd even earned it. Now, my money was mine. My time was mine. My energy was mine to spend on my own life. I think I forgot what it felt like to live for myself, I said. And how does it feel? Selfish and wonderful and terrifying. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Tommy. Maya, your parents are really struggling with this. Is there any way you'd consider talking to them? I showed Alex the message, and she shook her head. Even now, they're sending intermediaries instead of facing you directly. Should I respond? Do you want to? I thought about it, weighing my desire for peace against my need for fundamental change in how my family operated. Not yet, I said finally. They need to sit with the consequences of their choices for a while. They need to understand that I'm not going to rush in to fix this crisis like I've fixed all the others. What if they lose the house? Then they lose the house. That's what happens when you can't afford your mortgage and you don't have a daughter subsidizing your lifestyle. The words felt harsh coming out of my mouth, but they also felt true. For years, I'd been protecting my family from the natural consequences of their financial decisions, enabling them to live beyond their means while I lived below mine. Maybe it was time for reality to catch up with them. On Friday afternoon, I was leaving my office after a productive week of focusing entirely on my own work when I ran into Emma, my coworker who'd become a close friend over the past year. Maya, you look amazing. Did you do something different? With your hair? I don't think so. Why? You just seem, I don't know, more relaxed, less stressed than usual. I had a family situation that I finally resolved. Oh, good. I was wondering about that. You've seemed really tense lately, always checking your phone, always worried about something. I realized she was right. For months, maybe years, I'd been carrying my family's financial anxiety as if it were my own, constantly alert for the next crisis that would require my intervention. My coworkers had probably noticed the stress even when I thought I was hiding it well. The situation is resolved, I said, and felt a wave of satisfaction at the truth of that statement. Great! Hey, a bunch of us are going out for drinks tonight to celebrate the Peterson account. Want to join? For the first time in memory, I didn't have to check my phone for family emergencies or calculate whether I could afford a social evening out. I'd love to. The bar was crowded and loud, filled with young professionals celebrating the end of another work week. As I sat with my colleagues, laughing at office gossip and complaining about difficult clients, I realized this was what normal adult life looked like. These people went to work, earned money, and spent it on their own lives without feeling guilty about every purchase or constantly monitoring their phones for family crises. Maya, you seem different tonight, Emma said during a lull in the conversation. More present somehow. I feel more present. I finally stopped letting my family treat me like their personal ATM. Oh God, family money drama is the worst. My brother went through something similar with his in-laws. It's amazing how people can convince themselves that taking advantage of you is actually doing you a favor. Exactly, like I should be grateful for the opportunity to fund their lifestyle while getting nothing in return. What finally made you put your foot down? I thought about the garage, about the family photo that didn't include me, about years of being treated like a convenience rather than a person. I realized that if I didn't respect myself enough to demand better treatment, no one else was going to do it for me. Good for you. That takes real courage. Courage. I'd never thought of it that way, but maybe she was right. Maybe it had. Taken courage to walk away from a role that was slowly killing my sense of self-worth. Maybe it had taken courage to demand that the people who claim to love me actually treat me with love. The weekend passed quietly, and I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, absolutely nothing productive. I slept late, wandered through farmers' markets, sat in coffee shops reading novels instead of working on projects. I let myself be bored, let myself exist without purpose or obligation, or the constant pressure to be useful to someone else. On Sunday evening, as I was cooking dinner for myself in my peaceful apartment, my phone rang with a call from Jenny. "Maya, we need to talk about the kids." "Hello to you too, Jenny." "I'm serious. Emma keeps asking when Aunt Maya is coming to visit, and Jake doesn't understand why you're not coming to his birthday party next month. Maybe because no one invited me to his birthday party." "Of course you're invited. Your family." "Am I? Because the last time I was around the family, I slept in a garage while everyone else got comfortable beds." "Maya, you know that wasn't personal. The house was just full." "It was personal, Jenny. Everything about how you've all treated me has been personal. You've been taking my money and my time and my energy for years while treating me like I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" "Fair would have been acknowledging what I was doing for this family instead of pretending it was no big deal. Fair would have been including me in family decisions that I was funding. Fair would have been treating me like a person instead of a resource. The kids miss you. The kids will be fine. Maybe this is a good opportunity for them to learn that Aunt Maya isn't an endless source of money and babysitting." "So you're punishing children for their parents' mistakes?" "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting myself from a family dynamic that was slowly destroying my sense of self-worth." "Maya, please. Can't we just go back to how things were before?" "Before what? Before you found out how much I'd been supporting you? Before I finally stood up for myself? Before I stopped pretending that being used was the same thing as being loved?" "We weren't using you." "Yes, you were. And the fact that you can't even admit it now tells me that nothing has actually changed." I hung up and turned off my phone, feeling exhausted by the conversation, but also strangely relieved. Each interaction with my family was confirming that I'd made the right choice, that the pattern of exploitation was so deeply ingrained that they couldn't even see it, let alone change it. The following week brought a new challenge, my first mortgage-free month in 3 years. Without the automatic transfer depleting my account, I found myself with more money than I'd seen at one time since college. The temptation to send some of it to my parents was strong, muscle memory from years of taking care of their needs before my own. Instead, I did something radical. I opened a retirement account and made a substantial contribution. Then I researched vacation destinations, something I hadn't done in years because travel had always seemed impossible with my family obligations. I found myself dreaming about trips to places I'd only seen in magazines, adventures that would be possible now that I was keeping my money for myself. The transformation wasn't just financial. Without the constant stress of managing other people's crises, I found myself sleeping better, eating better, taking better care of my health. I made a dentist appointment I'd been putting off for months. I joined a yoga studio near my apartment. I bought clothes that fit properly instead of whatever was cheapest. Each act of self-care felt like a small rebellion against the person I'd been trained to be, the one who put everyone else's needs before her own and called it love. On Thursday afternoon, I was walking home from work when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the steps of my building. Marcus, looking rumpled and tired, with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for hours. "Maya, thank God. I was starting to think you'd moved without telling anyone." "What are you doing here, Marcus?" "I came to talk to you, to apologize, and to try to understand what happened." "What happened is that I finally stopped letting you all take advantage of me. Can we go inside, please? I drove down from Millbrook just to see you. Against my better judgment, I led him into the building and up to my apartment. Alex was at work, so we had the place to ourselves, but I didn't offer him coffee or try to make him comfortable. This wasn't a social visit. Maya, I want you to know that I've been thinking about everything you said at the reunion, about the money, about how we've been treating you. And you were right, about all of it. The admission surprised me. I'd expected more denial, more attempts to minimize what had happened or frame it as a misunderstanding. I was right about what, specifically? We were using you, taking your money and your time and giving nothing back, treating you like you should be grateful for whatever attention we gave you while ignoring what it was costing you. I studied his face, looking for signs that this was just another manipulation, another attempt to get me back in line. Instead, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse. What changed your mind? The past 2 weeks, watching Mom and Dad panic about the mortgage, scrambling to figure out how to make ends meet without your help. Realizing that I'm 32 years old and I've been letting my younger sister pay for my car while I chase dreams that aren't paying off. So this is about the money. No, it's not about the money. It's about understanding that we turned you into the family caretaker without ever asking if that's what you wanted. It's about realizing that we convinced ourselves your success meant you didn't need the same care and attention we gave everyone else. I settled onto the couch across from him, curious despite myself about where this conversation was heading. What do you want from me, Marcus? I want to apologize, really apologize, not just say sorry and expect things to go back to normal. I want you to know that I understand what we did to you, and I want to figure out how to be your brother instead of your dependent. And what would that look like? I don't know yet. I've never had to be an actual adult before. I've always had you as my safety net, and before that, I had Mom and Dad. I've never had to take full responsibility for my own life. It's terrifying at first, I said, thinking about my own recent experience with independence. But it's also liberating. Is there any chance you might be willing to help me figure it out? Not financially, he added quickly. Just as a sister. As someone who's managed to build a real adult life. I considered his request, weighing my desire to help against my need to protect myself from falling back into old patterns. I might be willing to do that, I said carefully, but it would have to be different this time. No emergencies that require my money, no crises that become my responsibility to solve. Just brother and sister having conversations about life. I'd like that. I'd like to get to know the person you are when you're not taking care of everyone else. I'm still figuring that out myself. Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine rather than calculated. Maybe we can figure it out together. After he left, I sat in my apartment thinking about the conversation and what it might mean. For the first time, since the reunion, someone in my family had acknowledged not just what they'd done, but why it was wrong. Marcus hadn't asked for anything except the possibility of a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. It wasn't enough to heal everything that had been broken, but it was a start. And maybe, if the rest of my family could follow his example, there might be a way to rebuild what we'd lost on a foundation of honesty instead of exploitation. But even if they couldn't change, even if Marcus was the only one capable of growth, I knew now that I would be okay. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand better treatment, and I'd discovered that I was capable of building a life that didn't require me to sacrifice my happiness for everyone else's comfort. The girl who had slept in the garage just 2 weeks earlier was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to demand that others recognize it too. And for the first time in my adult life, that felt like enough. The text came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring me awake with its insistent buzzing. My first thought was work emergency, but when I grabbed my phone, I saw my mother's name on the screen. "Maya, your father is in the hospital. Heart attack. We need you." For a moment, my body reacted the way it had been trained to react for years, adrenaline flooding my system as I mentally calculated travel time to Millbrook and what work meetings I'd need to cancel. Then I stopped, forced myself to breathe, and read the message again. We need you. Not Dad is asking for you, or we want you here because we love you. We need you. Even in a crisis, even when Dad might be seriously ill, their first instinct was to frame it in terms of what I could provide rather than who I was to them. I called the hospital directly instead of responding to Mom's text. After being transferred twice, I reached someone in the cardiac unit who could give me actual information. Robert Chen was admitted last night with chest pains, but tests show it was anxiety-related rather than a heart attack. He's stable and expected to be discharged this afternoon. Anxiety-related, I repeated. Yes, likely brought on by stress. Has he been under any unusual pressure lately? I almost laughed at the question. You could say that. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen with my coffee, processing the information. Dad wasn't dying. He was having panic attacks, probably, related to the financial pressure of suddenly having to pay his own bills for the first time in 3 years. And Mom's immediate response had been to call me, to try to use his medical crisis as leverage to pull me back into my old role. I texted, Becca, spoke to the hospital. Glad to hear it wasn't actually a heart attack. Hope he feels better soon. The response came immediately. Maya, he's asking for you. Can you come up today? I stared at the message, recognizing the manipulation for what it was. Maybe Dad was asking for me. Or maybe Mom was using his illness as an excuse to force a reconciliation on her terms. Either way, I wasn't going to be guilted into abandoning the boundaries I'd set. I'm glad he's okay. Let me know if there are any real medical emergencies. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Mom, of course. Maya, I can't believe you're being so cold about this. Your father is in the hospital. My father is having anxiety. Attacks because he can't afford his lifestyle without my money. That's not the same thing as a medical emergency. How can you say that? He's your father. And I'm his daughter, but that didn't stop you from putting me in a garage while I paid your mortgage. Maya, please. This isn't the time for old arguments. He needs his family right now. Does he need his family or does he need his ATM? The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me my words had hit their target. That's a terrible thing to say. But is it wrong? Mom was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the sounds of the hospital in the background, the beeping and bustling that accompanied medical crises, both real and manufactured. Maya, what do you want from us? What would it take for you to come home? I want you to understand that I am home. This is my home, my life, my choice. And I want you to stop trying to manipulate me into resuming a role that was destroying my mental health. We're not trying to manipulate you. Mom, Dad has anxiety attacks about money, and your first instinct is to call me instead of calling a financial counselor. That's manipulation. But you're our daughter. You're supposed to care about us. I do care about you. But caring about someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being to enable their poor choices. I hung up before she could respond, but I knew the conversation wasn't over. My family had spent years perfecting their guilt techniques, and they wouldn't give up after one failed attempt. The calls started an hour later. First Jenny, crying about how Dad had looked so fragile in the hospital, and how could I be so heartless. Then Uncle Tommy, asking if I really wanted to let pride keep me from my father's bedside. Then Aunt Patty, wondering if I understood how much stress I was putting on the family during an already difficult time. Each call followed the same basic script. Family comes first. This is bigger than our disagreement. How could I be so selfish when Dad was sick? None of them acknowledged that Dad's sickness was anxiety about the financial consequences of treating me badly. None of them seemed to understand that rushing to fix this crisis would just reinforce the pattern that had gotten us here in the first place. By noon, I'd stopped answering the phone entirely. But the texts kept coming, a steady stream of emotional manipulation designed to wear down my resolve. Jenny, the kids are asking why Aunt Maya doesn't love Grandpa anymore. Marcus, I know you're angry, but he's really scared right now. Uncle Tommy, family means showing up even when it's hard. Mom, please Maya, I'm begging you. Each message was a small attempt to hook into my guilt, to drag me back into the role of family fixer. I could feel the familiar tug of obligation, the voice in my head that whispered that maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should just go help them one more time. But I'd learned something important over the past few weeks. That voice wasn't love. It was conditioning. Years of being trained to believe that my value was tied to my usefulness. That caring for people meant accepting any treatment they gave, me in return. Instead of responding to the texts, I did something radical. I called Alex at work. Maya, what's wrong? You never call during the day. My dad's in the hospital with anxiety attacks about money, and my family is trying to guilt me into coming home to fix their financial crisis. Oh, hell no. Please tell me you're not falling for that. I'm trying not to, but they're really laying it on thick. Multiple family members calling, texts about how I'm hurting the kids, the whole emotional manipulation playbook. Maya, listen to me. If your dad was actually dying, actually in real medical danger, that would be different. But having panic attacks because he can't afford his mortgage? That's not your emergency to fix. I know that intellectually, but no buts. This is exactly what abusive families do. They create a crisis and then blame you for not fixing it. You walking away from financial abuse doesn't make you responsible for their anxiety about losing their financial safety net. Alex was right, and I knew it. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things, especially when you've been programmed from childhood to prioritize everyone else's feelings over your own. What if he actually has a heart attack from the stress? Then that's the consequence of his choices. Maya, you can't live your life hostage to other people's potential medical emergencies. That's not love, that's control. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about control and love and the difference between the two. My family claimed they loved me, but love doesn't come with conditions. Love doesn't require you to sacrifice your financial security and mental health to prove your devotion. Love doesn't put you in a garage and then blame you for being ungrateful. What my family had been offering me wasn't love. It was a transaction, where my money and compliance were exchanged for their approval and inclusion. And when I'd tried to renegotiate the terms, they'd responded by trying to make me feel guilty for having needs and boundaries. My phone buzzed with a new text, this one from Grandma Rose. Your father is fine. Discharged an hour ago. Don't let them guilt you into something you'll regret. I smiled for the first time all day. At 82, Grandma Rose had seen enough family drama to recognize manipulation when she saw it, and she was the only member of my family who seemed to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior. The afternoon brought a new wave of contact attempts, but this time they were different. Instead of guilt and manipulation, I started receiving what seemed like genuine concern from unexpected sources. Emma, my coworker, stopped by my desk around 3 o'clock with a concerned expression. Maya, are you okay? You seem really distracted today. Family drama. My dad's having anxiety attacks because I stopped financially supporting them, and now everyone's acting like I'm the villain for not rushing home to fix everything. That's awful. I'm sorry you're dealing with that kind of pressure. The weird part is, I think some of them actually believe I'm being cruel. Like they've convinced themselves that setting boundaries with family is the same thing as abandoning them. That's how toxic family systems work. They normalize dysfunction and then make you feel guilty for trying to be healthy. It was a relief to talk to someone who understood, someone who wasn't invested in maintaining the fiction that family love meant accepting any treatment. Emma's validation helped strengthen my resolve, reminded me that the guilt I was feeling was manufactured rather than justified. At 4 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from Dylan, my cousin. Unlike the other family members who'd been trying to guilt me into compliance, Dylan sounded genuinely concerned rather than manipulative. "Maya, I heard about Uncle Bob. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay. It wasn't actually a heart attack, just anxiety about the financial situation." "Yeah, I figured. Look, I want you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you're wrong about this." "Really?" "Really. My mom and I were talking about it last night, and we both think Uncle Bob and Aunt Linda have been taking advantage of you for years. What you did at the reunion was brave." "I don't feel brave. I feel like I started a war." Sometimes wars need to be started. Sometimes that's the only way to change a system that's been broken for too long. Dylan's support meant more to me than I'd expected. He was close enough to the situation to understand the dynamics, but far enough removed to see them clearly, and his validation helped counter the narrative my immediate family was trying to create about my supposed cruelty. "Dylan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I'm being too harsh? Everyone keeps telling me that family is supposed to forgive, that I should just go back to how things were." "Maya, family is supposed to treat each other with respect. They weren't doing that. You tried to address it quietly for years, and they ignored you. Sometimes the only way to get people's attention is to do something dramatic. Even if it hurts them? They hurt you first, for years. You're just the one who finally said it out loud." After the call, I felt something shift inside me. The guilt that had been gnawing at me all day started to recede, replaced by a clearer understanding of what had actually happened. I hadn't abandoned my family. I hadn't been cruel or unreasonable. I'd simply stopped accepting unacceptable treatment and insisted on basic respect. The fact that this request for basic human dignity had created such chaos said everything about how dysfunctional our family system had become. Around 6 o'clock, as I was getting ready to leave work, I received an unexpected email from Mrs. Patterson, the woman who ran the grocery store in Millbrook. She'd somehow gotten my work email address, probably from my mother, and her message was brief but powerful. "Dear Maya, I heard about your father's hospital visit and wanted you to know that some of us in town understand what's really going on. Your family has been bragging about their financial stability for years while you've been quietly making it possible. Don't let them guilt you into thinking you're the problem. You did the right thing. Sometimes families need to learn the hard way that love isn't supposed to be a one-way street. Take care of yourself, honey." The message brought tears to my eyes. Here was someone who barely knew me, someone with no stake in my family drama, who had nevertheless taken the time to offer support and validation. She'd seen what my own family had refused to acknowledge, that I'd been carrying them for years while being treated as disposable. More messages started trickling in over the evening. My high school English teacher, who'd heard about the situation through the small-town gossip network, sent a Facebook message saying she'd always known I was strong and was proud of me for standing up for myself. The woman who'd lived next door to us when I was growing up sent a card to my apartment saying she'd watched me grow up into a generous young woman and hoped I was taking care of myself now. Even people who had only heard secondhand accounts of what had happened seemed to understand that this wasn't about a spoiled daughter throwing a tantrum. This was about a pattern of exploitation that had finally been called out, and the community response was overwhelmingly supportive. The validation from people outside my immediate family helped me see the situation more clearly. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't being unreasonable. I had been treated badly, and I had every right to protect myself from further harm. That evening, as I sat in my apartment reading through the messages of support, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that other people saw me as a whole person, rather than just a function. These neighbors and teachers and community members understood that I had value beyond what I could provide, that I deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. The phone rang again, but this time the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another family member calling from someone else's phone to bypass my screening, but something made me answer. Maya, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from the cardiac unit at Millbrook General. I treated your father yesterday. My stomach dropped. Is he okay? Did something happen? He's fine, physically. But I wanted to call because your mother listed you as the emergency contact, and I think there's something you should know about his condition. Okay, your father's symptoms were entirely stress-related. No heart damage, no blockages, just severe anxiety manifesting as chest pain. When I asked him about recent stressors, he told me about a financial situation with his daughter. I waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. Maya, I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of family dynamics. What your father described to me sounds like he's been financially dependent on you for some time, and he's having panic attacks because that support has been withdrawn. That's accurate. I want you to know that his anxiety is not your responsibility. Adult children are not obligated to financially support their parents, especially not at the expense of their own well-being. The fact that he's having panic attacks about losing that support suggests an unhealthy level of dependence. The relief I felt at hearing a medical professional validate my position was overwhelming. Here was someone with no emotional investment in the situation, someone whose job was to treat illness and promote health, telling me that what I'd done was not only acceptable, but necessary. Thank you for telling me that, I said. I'm telling you because your mother spent an hour in my office yesterday trying to convince me that your absence was making your father sicker. That's not how anxiety works, and it's not fair to you. Your father needs to learn healthy coping mechanisms for financial stress, not rely on guilting his daughter into providing unlimited support. After the call, I sat in my living room feeling vindicated in a way I hadn't expected. A cardiac specialist had essentially confirmed what I'd been trying to tell my family for weeks, that their expectation of unlimited financial support was unreasonable and that my refusal to provide it was healthy boundary setting, not cruelty. The next morning brought a new development. I was getting ready for work when Alex knocked on my bedroom door with an expression that suggested bad news. Maya, there's someone here to see you. Your mom. My stomach clenched. She's here? In Brooklyn? Sitting on our front steps with a suitcase. She looks like she's been crying for hours. I found Mom exactly where Alex had described, perched. On the steps of our brownstone, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was clutching a tissue like a lifeline. Maya, thank God. I wasn't sure you'd see me. What are you doing here, Mom? I came to talk to you. Really talk, not just fight, or argue, or try to convince you to come home. I came to listen. You could have called. No, I couldn't. Every time we talk on the phone, I say the wrong thing. I make it worse. I thought maybe if I came here to your space, I could do better. Despite everything that had happened, seeing my mother in such obvious distress activated every protective instinct I'd ever developed. But I forced myself to stay calm, to remember that her pain didn't automatically make me responsible for fixing it. Mom, what do you want from me? I want to understand. I want to understand how we got to this point, how we hurt you so badly without even realizing it. You did realize it. You just didn't care enough to change anything. No, that's not true. We didn't realize the extent of it. We didn't understand what it was costing you emotionally and financially. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that looked like genuine remorse. What changed your mind? Yesterday, at the hospital, the doctor told me something. That made me realize how wrong we've been. She said that your father's anxiety wasn't your responsibility, that adult children aren't obligated to support their parents financially. And you believed her, but not me? Mom flinched at the accuracy of the observation. It's different when a stranger says it. When you said it, I thought you were just angry. When she said it, I realized it was true. So it takes a medical degree for my feelings to be valid? No, Maya, that's not what I mean. I mean that I was so caught up in our family dynamic that I couldn't see it clearly. It took an outsider to make me understand that what we were doing to you was wrong. We sat on the steps together, the morning Brooklyn traffic creating a steady background hum. Mom looked so out of place in the urban environment, like a character from my childhood who had wandered into my adult life. Mom, what exactly do you think you were doing wrong? Taking your money without acknowledging it. Treating you like your success meant you didn't need the same care we gave Marcus and Jenny. Putting you in the garage while benefiting from your generosity. And making you feel like your only value to us was what you could provide. The admission hung in the air between us, stark and honest in a way our family conversations rarely were. Do you understand why that was so damaging? I'm starting to. Yesterday, after the doctor talked to me, I went home and tried to imagine how I would feel if my parents had treated me the way we've been treating you. If they'd taken my money for years while making me sleep in a garage during family gatherings. And how did that feel? Horrible. Completely horrible. I would have been devastated. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was having a real conversation with my mother instead of just another round of emotional manipulation. Maya, I need you to know that we never meant to make you feel worthless. We thought we were celebrating your independence, your success. But you weren't celebrating it. You were exploiting it. You're right, we were. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if you can fix it, Mom. This isn't something you can apologize away. This is years of patterns, years of treating me like I existed to serve everyone else's needs. What would it take? What would we need to do to earn your trust back? I considered the question seriously, trying to imagine what genuine change would look like from people who had spent years taking me for granted. You'd need to prove that you value me as a person, not just as a provider. You'd need to show that you're capable of caring about my well-being with the same intensity you care about your own. How do we do that? I don't know, Mom. That's something you're going to have to figure out for yourselves. But it starts with stopping the guilt trips, stopping the manipulation, and accepting that I have the right to live my own life without constantly managing yours. Mom was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were red but determined. Maya, I want you to know that we're going to figure out the money situation without your help. Your father is going back to work, and we're meeting with a financial counselor to restructure our debt. Good. And we're going to sell the house. That surprised me. The house had been my parents' pride and joy for 20 years, the symbol of their success and stability. You're selling the house? We can't afford it without your help, and we can't keep expecting you to fund our lifestyle. It's time we lived within our actual means instead of within your means. The decision represented a fundamental shift in how my parents were approaching their finances, a recognition that their previous lifestyle had been built on my silent contributions. Where will you go? There's a nice apartment complex for seniors about 10 minutes from where we are now. Smaller, more affordable, but still in the same area so we can stay close to our friends. And you're okay with that? I have to be okay with it. The alternative is continuing to exploit my daughter, and I can't do that anymore. For the first time since this whole crisis began, I felt like my mother was taking real responsibility for her choices instead of just trying to manage the consequences. Mom, I appreciate you telling me this. It sounds like you're making some difficult but necessary changes. We are. And Maya, I want you to know that whether or not you ever forgive us, we're going to keep working on becoming the kind of people who deserve your forgiveness. What does that mean? It means we're going to therapy. Family therapy to understand how we created this dynamic, and individual therapy to work on ourselves. It means we're going to learn how to have relationships that aren't based on what we can get from other people. The commitment to therapy surprised me. My parents had always been skeptical of mental health treatment, viewing it as something for people who couldn't handle their problems independently. You're really going to therapy? We already had our first session yesterday. Dr. Martinez helped us understand some things about our family patterns that we'd never recognized before. Like what? Like how we taught you that love was conditional on what you could provide. Like how we created a system where your worth was tied to your usefulness. Like how we used guilt and obligation to control your choices instead of respecting your autonomy. Hearing my mother articulate these concepts in psychological terms gave me hope that maybe real change was possible, that this wasn't just another attempt to say the right words until I resumed my old role. Mom, I need you to understand that even if you do all of these things, even if you change completely, our relationship might never go back to what it was. I understand. And honestly, I don't want it to go back to what it was. What it was, wasn't healthy for any of us, but especially not for you. What do you want instead? I want to know you as the person you are now, not the person we trained you to be. I want to build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. And I want to prove to you that you matter to us for who you are, not what you can provide. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of hope that maybe my family was capable of the kind of fundamental change that would be required to rebuild our relationship. That's going to take time, Mom. A lot of time. I know. And I'm prepared to wait as long as it takes. And if it takes forever, if I decide that the damage is too extensive to repair, then I'll have to live with that. But I'll keep working on myself anyway, because that's what I should have been doing all along. After Mom left to catch her train back to Millbrook, I sat in my apartment processing the conversation and what it might mean for our future. For the first time since the reunion, someone in my immediate family had acknowledged not just what they'd done wrong, but why it was wrong and what they needed to do differently. It wasn't enough to heal everything that had been broken, but it was more than I'd expected. And it gave me hope that maybe, eventually, we could build something healthier from the ruins of what we'd lost. The rest of the week passed quietly, with no crisis calls or guilt trips from my family. It was the longest period of peace I'd had in my relationship with them since I'd started financially supporting them, and I began to understand what normal family contact might look like when it wasn't driven by need or obligation. On Friday afternoon, I received a text from Marcus that was different from any communication I'd had with my family in weeks. Hope you're having a good week. No agenda, just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. The simplicity of the message, the lack of any request or expectation, felt revolutionary. For the first time in memory, a family member was reaching out just to connect, not because they needed something from me. I texted back, "Thanks. That means a lot." His response came quickly, "Learning how to be a brother instead of a dependent. It's harder than I thought, but also better." As I sat in my office looking out at the Manhattan skyline, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my family dynamic. The crisis I'd created by setting boundaries had forced everyone to examine their behavior and their expectations. And at least some of them were choosing to grow instead of just trying to restore the status quo. It would take months, maybe years, to rebuild trust and establish new patterns of relating to each other. But for the first time since the reunion, I felt optimistic that it might be possible. My family was finally learning what I'd known all along, that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that true family relationships require mutual care rather than one-sided sacrifice. The girl who had slept in the garage was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to demand that others recognize it too. And while the transformation had been painful for everyone involved, it had created space for something healthier to grow in place of what had been broken. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.